The frigid river water numbed Beatrice Geller's ankles as she cradled her whimpering child closer to her chest, her soaked dress clinging to her trembling legs. Snowflakes danced in the growing darkness of the Montana wilderness, and her strength was fading with each labored step. The 3-month-old infant's cries grew weaker against her breast, and Beatrice knew that without shelter, they wouldn't survive the night. Lucas Lawson had been tracking the stray heifer since midday, cursing the spring snowstorm that had swept down unexpectedly from the mountains. His gloved hand pulled his worn sheepskin coat tighter around his broad shoulders as he urged his stallion forward along the banks of the Missouri River. The April of 1882 had been unforgiving, even by Montana standards. He heard the infant's cry first faint and pitiful against the rushing water. Lucas reined in his horse, listening intently through the snowfall. There it was again, unmistakable, human, desperate. "Hello," he called, turning his mount toward the sound. "Anybody there?" The response came as a weak sob rather than words. Following the sound, Lucas spotted a figure hunched by the riverbank, a woman clutching something small to her chest. He dismounted in one fluid motion, approaching cautiously. "Madam, you all right?" The woman looked up, her face ashen with cold and exhaustion. Dark hair escaped from beneath a sodden bonnet, and her lips had taken on a bluish tinge. But it was her eyes that struck Lucas most determined despite their desperation. "My baby," she managed through chattering teeth. "Please, help my baby." Lucas was beside her in an instant, taking in the dire situation. The woman's dress was soaked to her waist, and the tiny bundle in her arms was worryingly quiet. "Let me," he said, shrugging out of his coat. He gently took the infant, noticing how the little one's lips were turning the same alarming shade as the mother's. With practiced hands, he wrapped the child securely in his warm coat. "Safe," he promised, meeting the woman's frightened gaze. "Your little one's gonna be safe. So are you." Relief flickered across her features before her knees buckled. Lucas caught her with his free arm, supporting both mother and child. "Name's Lucas Lawson. Got a cabin about half a mile upstream. Can you make it that far, Beatrice?" she whispered. "Beatrice Geller, and this is Emma." She tried to stand straighter. "I can walk." Lucas studied her doubtfully. "Let's get you on buckshot." He whistled sharply, and the stallion approached. With careful maneuvering, he helped Beatrice onto the horse while still cradling the infant. "Hold onto the saddle horn," he instructed, placing Emma securely in her mother's arms before taking the reins and leading the horse through the falling snow. "What brings you out in weather like this?" he asked, hoping conversation would keep her alert. "Stagecoach. Overturned at the crossing." "Driver and guard." Her voice broke. "They didn't make it. The horses bolted. I tried to reach the settlement, but the trail disappeared with the snow." Lucas frowned. "The nearest settlement was Rimrock, a good 15 miles away. You've been walking since then, with your baby." "Had no choice," Beatrice murmured, her voice fading. "Emma first. Always Emma first." Lucas quickened his pace, concern mounting as Beatrice's responses grew more sluggish. When he finally spotted the cabin's outline through the trees, he nearly sagged with relief. "Almost there," he encouraged, but Beatrice didn't respond. Her eyes had closed, her grip on the saddle loosening. Lucas moved swiftly, taking the baby before helping Beatrice down. She collapsed against him, barely conscious. He half-carried her to the cabin, kicking the door open and hurrying inside. The warmth from the banked fire washed over them, but Lucas knew it wasn't enough. Hypothermia was a killer he'd seen claim too many lives in these mountains. Lucas laid Beatrice on his bed, placing little Emma beside her. Working quickly, he stoked the fire, adding logs until it roared in the stone hearth. Next came the difficult part. "Madam Beatrice," he said firmly, touching her cold cheek. Your clothes are soaked through. You need to get warm. Her eyes fluttered open, confusion evident in their depths. I have some dry things you can wear, he continued, pulling a flannel shirt and woolen trousers from his trunk. Can you change yourself, or do you need help? Beatrice seemed to understand the gravity of her situation. Emma first, she whispered. Lucas nodded, unwrapping the infant carefully. The baby's clothes were damp but not soaked through. He found a soft flannel shirt, tearing it into manageable pieces to fashion dry wrappings. The baby whimpered as he changed her, a sound that relieved him. Crying meant life. Your turn, he told Beatrice, placing Emma in a nest of blankets near the fire. I'll step outside. No, Beatrice clutched his arm weakly. Too cold out, just turn around. Lucas nodded, facing the wall as he heard the rustle of wet clothing hitting the floor. The effort seemed to drain Beatrice's remaining strength, as he soon heard a thud. Beatrice, he called, and when no answer came, he turned to find her collapsed on the floor, the dry shirt only partially buttoned over her chemise. Propriety be damned, he thought, lifting her onto the bed and completing the task of changing her into dry clothes with clinical efficiency. Once dressed in his two large garments, he tucked her under every blanket he owned and placed Emma in her arms. Hold her close, he instructed. Share your warmth. Through the night, Lucas kept the fire blazing, brewing strong coffee and checking on mother and child hourly. By dawn, color had returned to Beatrice's cheeks, and Emma was nursing contentedly. Thank you, Beatrice said, her voice stronger than the night before. You saved our lives. Lucas tipped his hat awkwardly, just did what anyone would. No, she countered, her gaze direct. Not anyone. Her eyes clouded suddenly. My trunk, everything we own, it was on the stagecoach. We'll figure something out, Lucas assured her, surprised by his own words. He'd lived alone for 5 years, ever since losing his wife and son to fever. The solitude had become his comfort, his protection. Yet something about Beatrice and her daughter stirred feelings he thought long buried. As soon as the weather clears, I'll take you to Rimrock, he added. Beatrice's face fell. I don't know anyone there. We were heading to Helena, to my cousin's place. Helena's nearly 100 miles north, Lucas said. Not a journey to make with a baby until the spring thaw is complete. Then what do I do? The vulnerability in her question pierced him. Stay here, he offered before he could reconsider. Until you figure things out, it's not much, but it's warm and dry. Tears welled in Beatrice's eyes. I couldn't impose. It's not imposing when it's offered freely, Lucas interrupted. Besides, little Miss Emma there seems comfortable enough. Beatrice looked down at her daughter, now sleeping peacefully. She does, doesn't she? A small smile curved her lips. Then we accept, Mr. Lawson, with gratitude. Lucas, he corrected. Just Lucas. Lucas, she repeated softly, and something in the way she said his name made his heart skip a beat, an unfamiliar sensation after so many years of numbness. As the snowstorm raged outside, inside the cabin, an unexpected warmth began to grow that had nothing to do with the crackling fire. The next morning dawned clear, the storm having blown itself out overnight. Lucas rose early, building up the fire before heading out to tend to his livestock. When he returned, he found Beatrice awake, Emma cradled in one arm while she attempted to stir something in his cast iron pot with the other. What's this? He asked, stomping snow from his boots. Beatrice looked up, a flush coloring her cheeks. I found some cornmeal. Thought I should earn our keep somehow. You don't need to, please, she interrupted. I need to do something. I'm not one to sit idle, even in the best circumstances. Lucas studied her for a moment, then nodded. Appreciate it. Been eating my own cooking too long. Over a breakfast of cornmeal mush sweetened with the last of his molasses, Lucas learned more about Beatrice. She was 26, widowed when her husband Daniel was killed in a mining accident in Colorado 6 months before Emma was born. Her cousin Martha and Helena had written offering her a home and help with the baby. Everything I had left went into those stagecoach tickets and the trunk that's now somewhere in the Missouri River, she concluded. What did your cousin do in Helena? Lucas asked. She runs a millinery shop. I've some skill with a needle. The plan was to help her with the business. Lucas nodded thoughtfully. Rimrock's growing. Might be call for such skills there too. He hesitated, then added, I need to ride out today, see if I can find any survivors from your stagecoach. Or at least recover some of your belongings. Fear flashed in Beatrice's eyes. You're leaving us, just for the day, he assured her. There's plenty of firewood stacked by the hearth. Keep the door barred while I'm gone. Is it dangerous here? She asked, instinctively holding Emma closer. No more than anywhere in these parts, Lucas replied honestly. Most folks around here are decent. It's the elements you've got to watch for, not the people. Beatrice seemed to take strength from his calm demeanor. We'll be fine then, she said with more confidence than she clearly felt. Lucas gathered his gear, checking his rifle and packing provisions. Before leaving, he hesitated at the door. There's a shotgun under the bed. You know how to use one. Daniel taught me, she replied. But I don't expect to need it. Neither do I, Lucas agreed. Back by sundown. The day stretched long for Beatrice, alone in a stranger's cabin with only her infant daughter for company. She busied herself tidying the small space, finding a certain comfort in the simple tasks. Lucas lived sparingly, she noted. Few decorations adorned the walls, just a set of antlers above the door and a small framed daguerreotype on the rough-hewn table beside the bed. Curiosity drew her to the image. It showed a younger Lucas, standing proudly beside a petite woman holding a small boy of perhaps 2. They looked happy, their smiles genuine even through the formal pose required for the photographer. His family, she murmured to Emma, who cooed in response. The absence of this woman and child from the cabin told a story Beatrice understood all too well, the story of loss. She carefully replaced the frame, feeling as though she'd intruded on something private. The knowledge that Lucas had suffered his own grief somehow made her trust him more. He understood what it meant to rebuild after losing everything. True to his word, Lucas returned as the sun dipped below the western mountains. His expression told her the news before he spoke. Found the stagecoach, he said, removing his snow-dusted hat. Recovered these. He placed a small bundle on the table, a woman's hairbrush, a silver locket, and a child's knitted blanket, clearly handmade. Tears sprang to Beatrice's eyes as she touched the blanket. I made this while carrying Emma, she whispered. Thank you for bringing it back. Your trunk was gone, he continued. River probably took it. The driver and guard, he paused, glancing at Emma. They're at peace now. Gave them what burial I could manage with the ground so frozen. Beatrice nodded, grateful for his consideration of both the dead and her feelings. You're a good man, Lucas Lawson. He looked away, uncomfortable with the praise. Made some stew, she added, changing the subject. Hope you like rabbit. How'd you get rabbit? He asked, surprised. Snare by the woodpile had one when I went out for logs, she explained. Figured you'd set it. Lucas's eyebrows rose. You skinned and dressed it yourself. Like I said, not my first winter in the mountains. She offered a small smile. Colorado mining camps teach a woman to be resourceful. Something like respect flickered in Lucas's eyes. Reckon they do at that. Over the next week, they settled into an unexpected routine. Lucas tended his small herd of cattle and hunted, while Beatrice kept the cabin in order and cared for Emma. In the evenings, they shared meals and conversation by the fire. Lucas spoke little of his past, But Beatrice pieced together that he'd lost his wife Sarah and son Thomas to influenza 5 years earlier. The pain still haunted him. She could see it in the way his eyes sometimes drifted to that daguerreotype when he thought she wasn't looking. On the 8th day, Lucas announced, "Weather's holding. I can take you to Rimrock tomorrow if you'd like." Beatrice looked up from mending one of his shirts, her needle poised mid-stitch. The offer shouldn't have surprised her. It had been the plan all along, yet somehow it did. "Oh," she said softly. "Yes, I suppose that would be best." Lucas nodded, his expression unreadable. "There's a decent boarding house. Mrs. Hollister runs it. She's strict but fair. Might have worked for you too." "That's very thoughtful." Beatrice resumed her stitching, trying to ignore the hollow feeling in her chest. She'd grown accustomed to the cabin, to Lucas's quiet presence. Emma seemed content here too, sleeping better than she had since birth. Unless... Lucas began, then stopped. Beatrice looked up expectantly. "Unless..." He cleared his throat, staring intently at the fire. "Winter's not done with us yet. Another storm could come any time. Might be safer to wait a bit longer." Hope fluttered in Beatrice's heart, though she kept her voice neutral. "If you think that's best, we don't want to be a burden." "No burden," he said quickly. "Truth is, cabins felt more like a home this past week than it has in years." The admission clearly cost him something. Beatrice set aside her sewing and moved to sit beside him at the fire. "Emma and I have imposed on your kindness long enough. If you truly think Rimrock is our best option..." "I don't," he interrupted, meeting her gaze directly. "What I think is that you should send a letter to your cousin in Helena. Let her know you're safe and stay here until the trails north are clear. That could be a month or more." "A month," Beatrice repeated, searching his face. "You'd have us here that long?" Lucas's expression softened. "Longer if you wanted." The implication hung between them, unspoken but clear. Something was growing between them, something neither had expected nor sought, but which felt as natural as the changing seasons. "I'd like that," Beatrice finally said, "for Emma's sake, and perhaps for mine as well." Lucas reached out hesitantly, covering her hand with his. "For mine too." The next day, Lucas rode to Rimrock alone, carrying a letter for Beatrice's cousin and returning with supplies: flour, sugar, coffee, and fabric for new clothes for Beatrice and Emma. Most surprising was a small wooden cradle he'd purchased from the town's carpenter. "Emma's getting too big for that basket by the fire," he explained gruffly when Beatrice's eyes filled with tears at the gesture. As March gave way to April, the snow began to recede from the valley, though the mountain passes remained treacherous. Lucas expanded his daily activities, working to repair winter damage to his small ranch. Beatrice discovered he owned a modest but viable cattle operation, with 20 head of prime stock that would soon produce calves. One evening, after Emma had been settled in her new cradle, Beatrice broached the subject that had been on her mind. "When the road's clear," she began carefully, "what happens then?" Lucas looked up from cleaning his rifle. "That depends." "On what?" "On whether you found a reason to stay." His voice was steady, but she could see tension in the set of his shoulders. Beatrice took a deep breath. "What if I have?" Lucas set the rifle aside and moved to sit beside her at the table. "Then you should know that this cabin, this land, it's not much, but it's mine, free and clear. Cattle are good stock, should fetch a fair price come fall. It's enough to support a family." He paused, gathering courage. "A man gets to thinking, out here alone, about what matters, what doesn't." "And what matters, Lucas?" Beatrice asked softly. "Not being alone anymore," he answered simply. "Finding someone who understands loss but still chooses hope." His calloused hand covered hers. "I'm not asking yet, Beatrice. It's too soon and you deserve time. But I want you to know there's a place for you here, for both of you, if you want it." Beatrice turned her hand to clasp his. "We've known each other barely a month." Known each other a lifetime in ways that matter, he countered. Loss shapes a person, shows what they're made of. You've shown me plenty. She couldn't argue with that truth. In their shared evenings, they'd revealed more to each other than many couples who'd courted for years. Necessity and isolation had accelerated their understanding of each other. Let's give it until summer, she suggested. If we still feel the same then. Then I'll be asking properly, Lucas finished, a smile warming his weathered features, and hoping for the right answer. As April progressed, the valley burst into life. Wildflowers carpeted the meadows, and the first of Lucas's calves were born. Beatrice found herself increasingly involved in the ranch operations, helping with the calving and learning to ride the gentle mare Lucas had acquired for her from a neighboring ranch. Emma thrived in the mountain air, growing chubby and strong. She'd begun to recognize Lucas, smiling widely whenever he entered the cabin and reaching for him with her tiny hands. The first time she'd fallen asleep on his chest, Beatrice had found him frozen in place, unwilling to move and disturb the baby, though his arm had long since gone numb. "Never thought I'd hold another child," he'd whispered, his voice thick with emotion. After Thomas, Beatrice had simply covered his free hand with hers, understanding that some wounds never fully healed but could be eased by new joys. Word of their arrangement had reached Rimrock, bringing the expected gossip. Lucas returned from one supply run in early May with a tight expression. "Preacher cornered me today," he announced as he unloaded provisions. "Suggested it wasn't proper, us living here without benefit of clergy." Beatrice froze, her cheeks flushing. "What did you tell him?" "Told him my intentions were honorable, and that was all he needed to know." Lucas set down a sack of flour with more force than necessary. "But he's right about one thing, folks will talk. Might make it harder for you in Rimrock, if that's still where you're headed come summer." The implication was clear. Their unconventional living arrangement could damage Beatrice's reputation, limiting her options if she chose not to stay with Lucas permanently. "I've never much cared what people think," she replied, resuming her kneading of bread dough. "But I don't want to bring scandal to your doorstep either." Lucas moved behind her, placing his hands lightly on her shoulders. "Only thing that matters to me is what you think, what you want." Beatrice leaned back against him slightly, permitting the contact that had become increasingly common between them, a hand on the small of her back as they walked, fingers brushing while passing items at the table, sitting shoulder to shoulder by the fire in the evenings. "What I want," she began slowly, "is to make sure whatever choices I make are for the right reasons, not from gratitude or necessity." "And what would be the right reasons?" Lucas asked, his breath warm against her hair. Beatrice turned to face him. "The same reasons any woman chooses to bind her life to a man's. Love, trust, shared purpose." Lucas's eyes darkened. "And do you have those reasons, Beatrice?" Instead of answering with words, Beatrice rose on her tiptoes and pressed her lips to their first kiss. It was gentle, tentative, a question more than a statement. Lucas remained still for a heartbeat, then his arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer as he deepened the kiss. When they separated, both breathless, Lucas rested his forehead against hers. "I wasn't expecting that." "Neither was I," Beatrice admitted, "but it felt right." "It did," he agreed. A smile tugged at his lips. "Might need to try it again, though, to be sure." Their second kiss confirmed what they both already knew: the connection between them had grown into something neither could deny. Still, they maintained their agreement to wait until summer before making permanent decisions. Some nights, after Emma was asleep, they would sit on the porch together, watching the stars and talking of their pasts, their losses, and increasingly their shared future. In late May, a letter arrived from Beatrice's cousin Martha in Helena. expressing relief at learning of her safety and extending a continued invitation to join her. The letter presented Beatrice with the choice she'd been contemplating for weeks: continue north to the security of family and a guaranteed position, or stay and build something new with Lucas. "She still wants me to come," Beatrice told Lucas that evening, the letter resting on the table between them. Lucas nodded, his expression carefully neutral. "Understandable. She's family. She says there's plenty of work, that Emma would have advantages in a larger town." Beatrice watched Lucas's face closely. "She makes a compelling case." "Can't argue with that," Lucas agreed, though she could see the tension in his jaw. "Helena's growing fast, good schools, doctors nearby." "All true," Beatrice said. "Practical considerations that any responsible mother would weigh seriously." Lucas stood abruptly, moving to stare out the window at the darkening valley. "When would you leave?" "I didn't say I was leaving," Beatrice pointed out quietly. He turned, hope and wariness battling in his expression. "Aren't you?" Beatrice rose, moving to stand before him. "Lucas, these past months have been unexpected. When you found us by that river, I was certain Emma and I were going to die. Instead, we found safety. A home." She placed a hand on his chest, feeling his heart pound beneath her palm. "I found you. Are you saying—" "I'm saying I don't need until summer to know my mind or my heart," Beatrice interrupted. "Emma and I belong here now, with you, if that's still what you want." Lucas's hands framed her face with infinite gentleness. "It's all I want," he whispered before claiming her lips in a kiss that promised everything. The following Sunday, they rode into Rimrock together, Emma bundled securely against Beatrice's chest. Their destination was the small white church at the edge of town. The Reverend Wilson, despite his earlier misgivings about their living arrangement, couldn't hide his pleased smile when Lucas stated their purpose. "Mighty glad to hear it," the preacher said. "Mrs. Hollister's been baking a wedding cake since yesterday, on the assumption you'd be making things proper." Lucas raised an eyebrow. "The whole town knows our business, it seems." "Small towns," Reverend Wilson shrugged. "No secrets, but plenty of goodwill for a man like you, Lawson. Folks remember how you helped during last year's fever outbreak. They'll stand by you and your new family." The ceremony was simple but meaningful. Beatrice wore a new dress of blue calico, purchased on their last visit to town, with wildflowers in her dark hair. Lucas had shaved his beard and donned a new shirt, looking younger and somewhat nervous as they stood before the preacher. Emma, as if understanding the significance of the day, remained peacefully asleep in Mrs. Hollister's arms during the brief ceremony. The boarding house proprietress had appointed herself honorary grandmother to the child, clucking with approval throughout the proceedings. "Do you, Lucas James Lawson, take Beatrice Ann Geller to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Reverend Wilson intoned. Lucas's eyes never left Beatrice's face as he answered, "I do." When it came her turn, Beatrice's voice was clear and certain, "I do. Then, by the authority vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife." The preacher beamed. "You may kiss your bride, Mr. Lawson." Lucas did so with restraint appropriate to the setting, though the promise in his eyes spoke of more to come later. The small congregation of townsfolk, many of whom Beatrice was meeting for the first time, erupted in applause. The impromptu wedding celebration at Mrs. Hollister's boarding house lasted well into the afternoon, with most of Rimrock's 100-odd residents making an appearance to congratulate the couple and coo over Emma. Beatrice found herself overwhelmed by the genuine warmth of these strangers who were now her neighbors. "Folks been worried about Lucas," Mrs. Hollister confided as they cut the promised wedding cake. "Living out there alone all these years since he lost Sarah and the boy. Started to think he'd never find his way back to living." The older woman patted Beatrice's hand. "You're good for him, dear. Anyone can see that." By evening, they were back at the ranch, their home now, truly and legally shared. Emma, exhausted from all the attention, fell asleep almost immediately in her cradle. Lucas built up the fire, then turned to Beatrice with a mixture of desire and uncertainty. "Mrs. Lawson," he said softly, testing the new name. Beatrice smiled, crossing to him and winding her arms around his neck. "I like the sound of that." Their wedding night was everything Beatrice could have hoped for, tender, passionate, and filled with discoveries. Lucas proved to be a considerate and attentive lover, his initial hesitance giving way to confidence as they learned each other's bodies. Later, lying in his arms as moonlight filtered through the cabin windows, Beatrice marveled at the journey that had brought her here. "What are you thinking?" Lucas murmured against her hair. "About that night by the river," she answered honestly. "How close we came to never having this." His arms tightened around her. "Don't think about that. You're here now. You're safe, both of you, because of you," she whispered. "No," he disagreed. "Because you're the strongest woman I've ever known. You kept walking, kept fighting for Emma. All I did was find you." Beatrice shifted to look into his eyes, and that made all the difference. Life as Mrs. Lucas Lawson settled into a rhythm different from, yet somehow familiar to, what Beatrice had known before. The ranch demanded constant work, calves to tend, garden to plant, preserves to put up for the coming winter. Yet unlike the desperate struggle of her widowhood in the mining camps, this labor brought satisfaction and a sense of building something lasting. Lucas proved to be a patient teacher, showing her the skills needed for ranch life without ever making her feel inadequate. In return, Beatrice brought efficiency and comfort to their home, transforming the functional bachelor cabin into a warm family dwelling with simple touches: curtains at the windows, rag rugs on the floors, and eventually, a small addition Lucas built to serve as Emma's room as she grew. As summer ripened toward fall, Beatrice realized she was expecting another child. She shared the news with Lucas on a warm August evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. "Are you certain?" he asked, wonder and concern mingling in his expression. "As certain as a woman can be," she replied, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach. "Come February, Emma will have a brother or sister." Lucas's eyes grew suspiciously bright. "A baby," he whispered, the word holding all his complicated emotions: joy, fear, memories of loss, hope for the future. "Our baby," Beatrice affirmed, understanding his unspoken concerns. "I know you worry after what happened with Thomas, but this is a new beginning, Lucas, for all of us." He drew her close, pressing his lips to her forehead. "You're right. Just promise me you'll be careful. Take it easy when you need to." "I promise," she agreed, though they both knew ranch life made such promises difficult to keep. Emma's first birthday arrived in September, celebrated with a small gathering of neighboring ranchers and their families. Lucas had become more social since their marriage, reconnecting with the community he'd withdrawn from after his losses. Watching him laugh with their neighbors, Emma perched happily on his shoulders, Beatrice felt a contentment she'd never expected to find again after Daniel's death. That night, after their guests had departed and Emma slept soundly, Lucas presented Beatrice with a small wooden box. "What's this?" she asked, opening it to find a delicate silver locket nestled on a bed of cotton. "Ordered it from Denver," Lucas explained. "Thought you might want something to keep memories close." Inside the locket were two tiny photographs, one of Emma, her baby face serious for the traveling photographer who'd visited Rimrock the month before, and one of Lucas, looking uncomfortable but determined in his formal pose. "It's perfect," Beatrice said, tears springing to her eyes. "Will you put it on me?" Lucas fastened the chain around her neck, his fingers lingering on the sensitive skin there. "Now you'll always have us with you." "As if I could forget," she teased, turning in his arms. "You Lawsons are rather unforgettable." His answering kiss was tender, expressing all the love that sometimes still struggled to find voice in words. As autumn painted the mountains in brilliant hues of gold and crimson, Lucas and two neighboring ranchers drove their cattle to the railroad at Helena for shipping to eastern markets. The 2-week absence was the longest they'd been apart since their marriage, and Beatrice found herself counting the days until his return, despite the frequent visits from neighbors checking on her and Emma. The cattle sale proved more profitable than expected, allowing Lucas to return with not only cash for winter supplies, but also a proper cook stove to replace the fireplace hook where Beatrice had been preparing their meals. The iron behemoth required 4 men to wrestle it into the cabin, but Beatrice's delight made the effort worthwhile. "You'll spoil me," she protested, even as she ran her hands lovingly over the gleaming surface. "That's the general idea," Lucas replied with a grin. "Got to keep you happy enough to put up with me." Their second winter together proved milder than the first, though still challenging. Beatrice's pregnancy progressed without complications, her body rounding gracefully as the baby grew. Emma, now toddling and beginning to form simple words, seemed fascinated by her mother's changing shape, patting Beatrice's stomach gently and saying "baby" with solemn importance. On a clear, cold February morning, with snow blanketing the valley and sunshine sparkling on the crystalline landscape, Beatrice's labor began. Lucas had prepared for this moment, arranging for their nearest neighbor's wife, Mrs. Jenkins, to attend the birth. He rode out at dawn to fetch her, leaving Emma in the care of the ranch hand he'd hired the previous fall. Mrs. Jenkins, a motherly woman who had assisted at dozens of births, arrived within hours. She shooed Lucas from the bedroom with firm instructions to keep water boiling and clean linens ready. The labor progressed steadily through the day and into evening, Beatrice drawing on her previous experience with Emma to manage the pain. As the clock struck midnight, Lucas paced the main room of the cabin, Emma long since asleep in her small bed. Each cry from behind the closed bedroom door tore at his heart, memories of Sarah's difficult labor with Thomas surfacing despite his efforts to suppress them. Finally, near dawn, a new cry pierced the quiet, the lusty wail of a newborn taking its first breath. Lucas froze, waiting, his heart pounding in his chest. When Mrs. Jenkins opened the door, her broad face wreathed in smiles, he nearly collapsed with relief. "You've got yourself a fine son, Mr. Lawson," she announced. "Strong as an ox and with a pair of lungs to match. Your wife's asking for you." Lucas entered the bedroom on unsteady legs. Beatrice sat propped against pillows, her face tired but radiant, a small bundle cradled in her arms. She looked up as he approached, her smile illuminating the dim room. "Meet your son," she said softly, pulling back the blanket to reveal a tiny face, eyes squeezed shut, a shock of dark hair plastered to his head. Lucas sat carefully on the edge of the bed, reaching out a tentative finger to touch the baby's cheek. "He's perfect," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Would you like to hold him?" Beatrice offered with reverent care. Lucas took his son into his arms, marveling at how small yet complete he was. "What shall we call him?" They had discussed names during the long winter evenings but made no final decision. Now, looking at the child's face, Beatrice knew. "Daniel," she suggested. "Daniel Lucas Lawson." Lucas looked up, understanding the significance, honoring both her past and their present in one name. "Daniel," he agreed. "It suits him." As if recognizing his name, the baby opened his eyes, regarding his father with an unfocused gaze that nonetheless seemed to peer directly into Lucas's soul. In that moment, the last shadows of Lucas's grief receded, not forgotten but finally placed in proper perspective. The past remained precious, but the future, this future with Beatrice, Emma, and now Daniel, called to him with irresistible promise. "I love you," he told Beatrice, the words coming easier now than in the early days of their marriage. "All of you." Beatrice reached for his hand, their fingers intertwining as they had that night by the river when he'd promised safety and delivered so much more. "And we love you, Lucas Lawson. Now and always." Spring arrived early that year, as if nature itself celebrated the expansion of the Lawson family. Daniel thrived, growing from a newborn into a sturdy infant with remarkable speed. Emma took her role as big sister seriously, helping her mother with exaggerated care that often created more work, but always brought smiles. As the ranch prospered, Lucas and Beatrice began discussing plans for a larger home. The cabin had served them well, but with 2 children and the possibility of more in the future, they needed more space. "Nothing fancy," Lucas emphasized as they walked the property one evening, Daniel asleep in his father's arms, Emma running ahead to chase butterflies. "Just practical. More bedrooms, maybe a proper parlor for when we have company. And a larger kitchen," Beatrice added, "with windows facing east for the morning light." They selected a site on a gentle rise overlooking the valley, with views of both the mountains and the river that had brought them together. Construction would begin after the fall cattle drive, using lumber from trees on their own land and stone from the nearby hills. "It feels right," Beatrice said, leaning against Lucas's side as they surveyed their chosen spot. "Building something new, something that's truly ours from the beginning." "Like our family," Lucas observed, pressing a kiss to her temple. In June, they celebrated their first wedding anniversary with a picnic by the river, not the dangerous section where Lucas had found Beatrice and Emma, but a gentle bend where wildflowers grew thick along the banks, and the water ran clear and shallow. Emma splashed in the shallows under her parents' watchful eyes, while Daniel napped on a blanket in the shade. "Did you ever imagine we'd be here?" Beatrice asked, her head resting on Lucas's shoulder as they watched their daughter's antics. "When you found us that night?" Lucas considered the question, his arm tightening around his wife's waist. "No," he admitted. "I was just trying to get you both through the night, wasn't thinking beyond that. And now," she prompted. "Now I think about all the nights ahead," he replied. "All the years. Watching these 2 grow up, maybe adding a few more to the brood." He glanced at her with a raised eyebrow and she laughed. "Let's give Daniel a chance to sleep through the night before we start planning the next one," she suggested. "But yes, I'd like that too. Eventually." Their conversation was interrupted by Emma's excited shrieks as she discovered a family of ducks paddling near the shore. Lucas rose to ensure she didn't wade in too deep, leaving Beatrice to marvel at how dramatically life could change in a single year. From desperate widow with nothing but her baby and the clothes on her back, she had become a rancher's wife, mother to 2 children, respected member of the community, and mistress of a growing homestead. The transformations went beyond the material, touching something deep in her soul. She had found not just security but joy, not just safety but love. When Lucas returned, Emma riding on his shoulders and demanding to see baby duck again, Beatrice welcomed them with a smile that conveyed all she couldn't put into words. "Happy?" Lucas asked, setting Emma down to run back to her water play. "Beyond measure," Beatrice confirmed, rising on tiptoes to brush a kiss across his lips. As autumn approached, the promised home began to take shape. Lucas and 2 hired men laid the foundation and raised the frame before the first snow. allowing interior work to continue through the winter months. By spring, the house stood complete, a sturdy two-story structure with 4 bedrooms, a spacious kitchen with Beatrice's eastern windows, and a wide porch wrapping around 3 sides. Moving day arrived with the first truly warm day of May. Neighbors came to help, making the task festive rather than arduous. Mrs. Jenkins organized the kitchen according to her own exacting standards, while her husband and sons moved the heavier furniture. The Wilsons from the next ranch over brought bedding plants for the garden Beatrice had marked out behind the house. By sunset, the new home was arranged to Beatrice's satisfaction. After their friends departed, the family gathered on the porch to watch the day's last light paint the mountains. "It's beautiful," Beatrice said, leaning against the railing with Daniel on her hip. At 14 months, he was a sturdy boy with his father's quiet temperament and his mother's dark eyes. Emma, now nearly 3, twirled in circles on the wooden planks. "Our house," she proclaimed. "Big house." "Big house for our growing family," Lucas agreed, coming to stand beside Beatrice. His hand rested lightly on her waist, where the first subtle roundness of another pregnancy was just becoming apparent. This baby, a girl they would name Sarah Ann, after both their mothers wouldn't arrive until November. But already, the anticipation filled their home with fresh joy. The rhythm of their life together had settled into something both comfortable and exciting, each season bringing new challenges and rewards. That night, after the children were asleep in their new rooms, Lucas and Beatrice stood in the doorway of the main bedroom, appreciating the space that was wholly theirs, from the quilt Beatrice had pieced during winter evenings to the sturdy bed frame Lucas had crafted by hand. "Welcome home, Mrs. Lawson," Lucas said softly, drawing her into his embrace. "Home," Beatrice repeated, savoring the word and all it represented. Not just the physical structure, but the life they'd built together. The love that had grown from an act of kindness beside a cold river into something enduring and profound. As they settled into their new bed, Beatrice found herself thinking of the many paths life could take, the many possible futures that branched from each moment of choice or chance. Had the stagecoach not overturned, had Lucas not tracked his stray heifer along that particular stretch of river on that specific snowy night, had either of them allowed past losses to close their hearts completely, none of this would exist. Instead, they had found each other. And in that finding, they had discovered what it meant to begin again, to build a life from the ashes of what had been lost, to transform tragedy into triumph through the simple, powerful alchemy of love. Outside, the Montana night wrapped around their new home like a blessing. Stars scattered across the vast sky like promises of all the bright tomorrows yet to come. 5 years later, on a summer day much like the one when they'd first married, Lucas and Beatrice Lawson stood on the porch of their home, watching their 4 children play in the yard below. Emma, now 8, supervised her siblings with precocious authority, Daniel at 6 trying to teach 4-year-old Sarah how to throw a ball, while 2-year-old Thomas toddled after them, determined not to be left out. "They're growing too fast," Beatrice observed, leaning against her husband's solid frame. Lucas chuckled, the sound rumbling through his chest where her head rested. "That's what my father always said. Never understood what he meant until now." The ranch had prospered along with their family. What began as Lucas's modest herd had grown into one of the most successful operations in the valley. The original cabin still stood, now converted to a bunkhouse for the 3 ranch hands they employed year-round. Last year, they'd added a schoolhouse to the property, hiring a teacher from back east who instructed not only the Lawson children but those from neighboring ranches as well. "Letter came today," Lucas mentioned, producing an envelope from his pocket. "From your cousin Martha." Beatrice took it eagerly. Though she had ultimately chosen not to join Martha and Helena, they maintained a regular correspondence. "She's been talking about visiting this summer. I hope she's finally set a date." The letter confirmed that Martha would indeed arrive within the month, planning to stay through August. "She says she's bringing trunks of fabric and patterns," Beatrice read aloud, laughing. "Apparently my fashion sense needs attention." "Your fashion sense suits me just fine," Lucas assured her, his appreciative gaze taking in the simple blue dress that complemented her still slender figure. At 31, Beatrice retained the beauty that had first caught Lucas's eye, though her face now showed the character that came with motherhood and the Montana elements. A few strands of silver had appeared in her dark hair, matching the ones threading through Lucas's beard. Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion from the yard. Sarah had apparently mastered the throw her brother was teaching her, sending the ball sailing through the air directly through the window of Lucas's office. "Sarah Ann Lawson," Beatrice called, trying to sound stern despite the laughter bubbling in her throat at the look of shocked accomplishment on her daughter's face. "Strong arm," Lucas commented proudly. "Like her mother." Beatrice arched an eyebrow. "I believe you'll be replacing that window, Mr. Lawson, not me." "Small price to pay," he replied easily, watching as Daniel consoled his sister, who now looked close to tears. For all of this, Beatrice understood exactly what he meant. Every broken window, scraped knee, and childhood squabble was a gift evidence of the vibrant, noisy, wonderful family they'd created together. That evening, after the children were tucked into bed with stories and kisses, Lucas and Beatrice sat on a blanket near the river, at what had become their special place. The summer twilight lingered, painting the water gold as it flowed gently past. "I've been thinking," Lucas began, his arm around Beatrice's shoulders, "about that night, how close I came to missing you." Beatrice nodded, knowing exactly which night he meant, the one that had changed everything. "If you hadn't come along when you did." "But I did," he said firmly. "That's what matters." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the river that had nearly taken Beatrice and Emma but had ultimately given them to Lucas instead. "Do you ever regret it?" Lucas asked suddenly. "Not going to Helena. You could have had an easier life there. Town comforts." "Society." Beatrice turned to face him, taking his weathered face between her hands. "Lucas Lawson, in all these years, have I ever once given you reason to think I regretted my choice?" He smiled sheepishly. "No, but a man wonders sometimes." "Then wonder no more," she said firmly. "Everything I want, everything I need is right here." She kissed him softly. "With you, with our children. This is where I belong." As if to emphasize her point, she reached into the pocket of her skirt and withdrew a small object, the silver locket he had given her years before. Opening it, she showed him the contents. The original photographs remained on one side, but on the other, a newer image had been added, a family portrait taken last Christmas, showing all 6 of them dressed in their finest clothes. "Past and present," she explained. "All my heart in one place." Lucas's eyes grew suspiciously bright in the fading light. "Beatrice," he murmured, pulling her closer. "My Beatrice." As the first stars appeared above the Montana mountains, they held each other beside the river that had brought them together, secure in the knowledge that what had begun as a desperate rescue on a snowy night had grown into the greatest blessing either could have imagined, a love strong enough to heal past wounds, brave enough to risk new joy, and deep enough to sustain them through whatever the future might hold. In the years that followed, the Lawson Ranch became known throughout the territory, not just for its fine cattle and horses, but also for the family that made it a beacon of warmth in the sometimes harsh frontier. Travelers passing through would speak of the handsome house on the hill, the laughter of children echoing across the valley, and the couple who clearly adored each other even after decades together. Few knew the full story of how Lucas and Beatrice had found each other, of a desperate young widow and her infant daughter, a lonely rancher haunted by loss, and the frigid river that had nearly claimed 2 lives but instead had given new purpose to 3. But those who spent any time with the Lawsons could sense that theirs was a love forged in difficult circumstances, tested by hardship, and ultimately triumphant. When asked the secret to their enduring happiness, Beatrice would smile and touch the silver locket she always wore, while Lucas would glance at his wife with eyes still full of wonder after all their years together. Neither needed words to express what they both knew to be true, that sometimes life's greatest blessings arrive in moments of greatest need, and that a simple promise of safety can blossom into a lifetime of love.